Hello, everyone. This is Len Rosenthal here from Dynamix, the Chief Marketing Officer. And welcome to this webinar. We're excited to have two great speakers that are joining us in this webinar. And we'll give you a quick introduction of those in a minute. So a little bit about the theme of this webinar and what we're going to be doing, and I'll give you some kind of housekeeping kind of stuff as well. So this will last roughly about 60 minutes. So I think we have about 45 minutes of content, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. You can ask questions at any time through your your Q&A panel there. So you can put those on. We'll attempt to address them as we're speaking. But we'll certainly address them directly at the end of the session here. So what we're going to try to do, we will make all these slides available. That's usually the question everybody asks. So yes, you'll get them sent to you, a link sent to you roughly within probably about 2 days. What's today? Today's Thursday, so maybe worst case Monday, if not Friday or Saturday. So the theme of this is all around, we'll call it knowing your limits. So particularly as we're transitioning into new storage technologies, I mean, these days everyone's trying to figure out how to drive down costs, how to make sure their infrastructure is high performance and highly available, and evaluate a bunch of new technologies. And the key point is which workloads and which applications can be deployed on these various new technologies, and how do you know where the limits are, in advance of these technologies for each of your specific workloads. So the two key presenters, actually all three of us will discuss this in various ways. Henry Baltazar is a well-known storage industry analyst at the 451 Research Group. He has been there for many years. He was also at Forrester for a while as the lead storage analyst as well. He's going to give kind of the industry perspective around some of these new storage technologies and customer intentions and some of the best practices that he is seeing from his perch at 451. And then Phil Smith is going to be joining us, and he's head of global storage architecture at a large financial services firm. We are not at liberty to disclose where he is, where he's working, but he is fairly well known and kind of easy to locate if you want to speak with him at some point later on that. And he's got great experience. Obviously, it's a very large firm, and they're transitioning this to various new storage technologies, looking at various different best practices to help evaluate and transform his infrastructure. And he'll discuss that in some good detail and be willing to take questions on that. And then at the end, particularly for people who are not terribly familiar with Load Dynamix, I'll give kind of a quick, maybe 5-10 minute overview of the Load Dynamix products and how it fits into this. So before I transition to Henry, so the other kind of big news around all of what's going on with Load Dynamix is many of you have probably heard that we have merged with a company called Virtual Instruments. And that was literally just announced last week. The deal finalized literally on Monday of this week, so this is brand new. We haven't even changed these slides, as you can see, because it still says Load Dynamix everywhere. But this will be the last event that's done under the Load Dynamix name. Virtual Instruments is a leader in infrastructure performance management and monitoring solutions, installed in probably roughly about almost 400 accounts, typically Fortune 1000. To monitor the infrastructure from the server to the switching network to the storage arrays, and giving people proactive analysis of what's going on in their infrastructure to solve problems and ensure performance and drive down costs. So obviously very synergistic with what Load Dynamix does. So with that, just to remind everybody that all of you are on mute, but again, you can ask questions on the Q&A screen. So without any further ado, I'm going to transition over to Henry, and he'll talk about kind of his view of what's happening in the industry. So Henry, on to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Len. This is Henry Baltazar here. I'm with the 451 Research. We're a technology research firm founded in 2000. And our company focuses on emerging technologies, and really We've been looking at storage technologies for quite a while. One of the key things I want to point out is I'm going to be going over some survey data from one of our other teams, which is VOTE, Voice of the Enterprise. These are surveys that we run on a quarterly basis, and as we go through these are numbers that I use often in presentations, but we get quarterly updates on these figures. So it's great data for us to show and discuss what's going on in the market. Myself, as Len said, I'm Henry Baltazar. I've been covering storage for the better part of 20 years, close to 20 years now. The first 10 years of my career, though, was actually spent in testing labs. I was the lead hardware tester for eWeek, testing servers and storage. And really, that's an area where I got a great appreciation for testing. I don't think you really know a whole lot about a product until you push a product to its limits. And that was something I did for hundreds and hundreds of product reviews. And I think that's why I was really excited to get this opportunity to present today with Load Dynamix, especially because I know how difficult it is to test, and I also know how important it is to figure out what results you're going to get based on data you're actually going to use and workloads that are applicable to your environment. So for today's presentation, I'm going to go really quickly over a quick storage market overview just to discuss what are some of the main problems we see, what our respondents are seeing in their environments. And also after that, we're going to go talk a little bit more about some advisement as to what are the things we can be doing to validate our workloads and make sure that we have a better understanding of what our performance limits are and what the limits are for the technology that we are planning to deploy. Looking at the storage market today, no surprise, dealing with capacity and data growth is still the #1 issue. That was the biggest issue for 55.4% of respondents. But the other things that I would want to point out here that show that we need better tools and better methodologies for managing this is, if you look at #2, 34% of respondents had a really hard time with capacity planning and forecasting, which tells me that they don't really have a good feel for what's happening in the workloads. Another key issue, which is not a surprise, is also the high cost of storage. The high cost of storage is forcing people to be a little more diligent about the things they want to deploy. And because of that, I think that's going to be a reason why people are going to want to test new technologies and make sure you can do the best. Make sure they can do the best job they can. Okay. So make sure they can do the best job with the investments they make. #4 on the list is also delivering adequate performance for the storage. So when you look at these, there's definitely a need for people to understand what's in their environment, what's going on with the workloads, and making sure that what you're doing in terms of improvements is going to make a difference in the long run. Next slide, if we look at what's going on with capacity growth, for 55% of respondents, they're going to be seeing For 55% of our respondents, you're going to be seeing significant growth of 25% or more. If you look at the top 10% of companies are going to see anywhere from 75% and above. So looking at these and working these out, within a couple of years, you're easily going to have more than double the amount of storage you have today. So unless you can start planning for this, you're going to get overrun with the new workloads and the new data that's being pushed into your infrastructure. On storage growth, the other key aspect is if you look at budgets are growing at a much more modest rate. Only about 18% of our respondents are going to see an increase in storage budget of more than 25%. If you see here, the majority of people, or the biggest group of people, are only going to get about a 10 and 24% increase. When I start matching the storage growth with the amount that we're getting in budget growth, it's clear that we're not really in a sustainable area. We need to do a much better job of taking advantage of the resources we have, and we have to make sure that the decisions we make are really going to deliver a payoff, because we can't afford to be wrong based on what's going on with our resources. Looking at what are the top storage goals, clearly right now one of the big things is beyond backup and disaster recovery and resiliency, customers need to find a better way of reducing costs, adding capacity, and also improving their application performance, which are all key issues that we talked about earlier. Right now, when we look at the environments, though Tier 1 storage has been declining, the people that have Tier 1 storage, the high-end storage system, the high-performance, high-resiliency systems, majority of them, or a large portion, 49% of them, are not planning on getting rid of Tier 1 storage systems. So it's going to be important to make sure that if we're deploying these, we're still getting the same kind of benefit, and we're making sure that these systems are good enough to hold the load, especially as performance requirements increase. Another key thing that we're seeing is a rise of storage complexity. This is not including backup tiers and disaster recovery tiers, but when we look at this, 59% of respondents today have 2 or more primary storage tiers. So they've already got a mid-range and a high-end and maybe even a flash tier in their environments. And because of this complexity, we have to be more efficient about making sure that we're putting the workloads in the right place. We're not wasting money on putting an idle workload on flash and things like that. So again, I think this also shows and emphasizes the reason why we have to have better tools to manage workloads. Looking at the procurement strategy, VMware administrators are becoming much more important in terms of storage buying decisions. What this says to me is that any tool that you're building has to have some intelligence on the VMware area, has to be able to give VMware administrators the type of insights that they're looking for, and has to be tightly integrated with them. So it's not something just for the storage management team. Now going into addressing the key pain points and challenges. To me, there are basically 5 things we're going to be covering throughout this slide deck, and we might as well kick off straight to the first one. I think the first one and most obvious thing is you can't really improve your environment until you know how your resources are being used. One of the first things you need to know is, well, what applications do you have in your environment that are being slowed down by storage performance or other issues within the infrastructure? You also need to know, are you using your storage capacity efficiency? If you bought a bunch of flash or you bought some really expensive storage, are you actually utilizing the performance of that storage? If you're not utilizing that performance, then you should be looking for other workloads to plug into that resource so you're extracting the value out of there. The other key thing is if you don't know the answer to those first 2 things, then you really have to think about, well, do we have workload and performance analytics tools in our environment, or do we have adequate tools in our environment? If not, it's a good time to start looking at this. I think there's a lot of really interesting tools in the market today, and it's a great time to have these tools come out so you can figure out what's going on in your environment and figure out the best way to optimize. Another key issue is, as you start doing the testing, as you do revisions, it's great to be able to look at your historical data because you want to be able to see what type of issues are happening in your environment often. Are there seasonality issues? Are you having big issues because of Black Friday? Are you seeing other issues tied to specific other elements within the environment? Those are a lot of the key things that you need to find out before you make any kind of decision, whether it be buying another array or trying to figure out the best way to deploy your current resources. Another key thing to take a look at is you have to work with your application stakeholders. You need to understand with them what's going to be the feature requirements for your applications. And for that, you really need to know what are the performance expectations you really need for their applications. What type of latency is acceptable for them? How many IOPS does their application need? What type of throughput do they need? If this is more of a big data thing or a backup thing or maybe it's a streaming media thing, you need to figure out what are the real performance expectations so you could size things up, size up your storage investments appropriately. Another key aspect, as we mentioned earlier, people are still struggling with capacity management. So you really have to work with your stakeholders to figure out what are their real data growth, expectations, and also take time to look at, well, what's happening in terms of compliance, what things are changing that are going to make us hold on to data longer. Another key aspect, I think, is to model your workloads, and this is definitely something I've learned in my years in testing. While benchmarks are great, it's great to look at industry standard benchmarks and show the glory numbers of I can do this many IOPS per second. Really, the most valuable metrics are what can this product do with your workloads, because everybody has different workloads, everybody has different requirements, and really, while it's great to see these numbers on a standardized benchmark level, really the most accurate way to see if the product's going to work is to be able to go in, profile your workload, understand your workload, and simulate and model your workload on the new equipment to make sure that it actually will work with the configuration you're trying to do. Again, just a little bit redundant, but definitely the best benchmarks or the best tests are the ones where you can model and represent your real workload profiles. Another key aspect, I think right now we're at a fantastic time in terms of storage innovation. There's a lot of cool, new, interesting technologies that you should be taking advantage of. But before you drop them in, it's also good to make sure that these things will perform at a superior level even when using your workloads. So looking at things like all-flash arrays, great high performance, but a lot of people still wonder about the cost justification for that. Well, if you want the cost justification, you need to figure out what you're going to get out of this from a performance level using your workloads. Software-defined storage, commodity hardware, that's still very much a developing market. In our last survey, about 20% of respondents have already deployed this. I expect that number to go up with time, but that's another area where because people are so used to buying appliances, there's another area where you want to do modeling and you want to do testing to make sure that these new alternatives can handle the workloads you want to throw at it. Scale storage such as NAS and object storage are another key area where we're seeing a lot of innovation and a lot of potential area for reducing management costs and also reducing the cost per gigabyte for maintaining and taking care of your storage. Again, there's another area where, it's great that it's bigger, but you have to make sure that's fast enough. You have to make sure it's resilient enough. You have to make sure it can deal with the unpredictable nature of workloads. Also, when you start looking at some of the modern storage requirements that are being built into arrays, things like storage QoS, where you control the IOPS or throughput or latency of a specific volume. Well, you're not going to be able to make these types of adjustments and make these types of optimizations unless you really know what the real behavior is of your workloads. So to me, as you start looking at some of these other capabilities, such as storage QoS, you have the ability to do API-based automation to accelerate provisioning, the ability to do VM-level granularity and snapshots and applications. You really can't do that until you understand what your workload is and what the real requirements are. And I think that's why before you start going into full deployments, you really have to start understanding and doing the testing first. As I mentioned earlier, if we look at some of the things, especially object storage is a market that we expect to grow rapidly over the next couple of years. But right now, it's still a relatively small part of the market. Projections for 2016, that's only going to be a little under $1 billion. It may be higher than that based on some of the activity we've seen in the market so far. But right now, it's still very small relative to the $30 or $40 billion external storage market. But looking at how people need to optimize, it's definitely going to be important for people to understand what the new options are and how well those new options will work with their workloads. Okay, and finally, my final slide here, the other key aspect to look at is, it's going to be very important to stress test your prospective products and existing infrastructure to make sure you know what the limitations are. A lot of most environments aren't going to be running these things at 100% utilization or even 80% utilization, but it's important to know how much you can push these resources when business stakeholders really need these capabilities. Right now, performance is money. If you can't perform at an adequate level, there's a lot of negative consequences for your environment. Whether that's going to be lost customers, whether it's going to be lost reputation because you can't meet your SLAs, or whether that be a competitive disadvantage in other areas. Your performance is going to be a really key aspect to what you're doing in terms of your storage infrastructure and what you're doing to optimize your infrastructure over the long haul. And to me, I think this is a great time to start looking at some of these new tools and making sure these tools can help you understand what you have in your environment and also make sure that you can recreate, test in an efficient manner so you can make sure that your next investment in storage, whether it be object storage, all-flash array, or just a new array, making sure that new thing that you're putting in is going to be able to handle the workload today and also what you're expecting for the future so that you don't overrun what you're trying to do with the system. And with that, I'm going to be turning things over to Phil.
Thanks, Henry. I appreciate it. Good day, everybody. I just want to thank Dynamix, who is now Virtual Instruments, for the opportunity to talk to you. I'm going to go through kind of what we're doing here at our firm. And really what this is just to kind of bring real life to what everybody else in the industry is facing. We all listen to our suppliers and our vendors, and we all listen to, gentlemen like Henry who are, very well in tune with what the industry is doing. But we're always trying to figure out, are they really telling us the truth, or are they just providing us marketing material? So really what I'm going to do for you guys today is just to kind of show you that everything you see on my upcoming slides is probably everything that you're questioning and going through and all those fun things. So this is really just a real-life approach to what everybody else is doing. So who am I? What am I doing here? So right now I'm currently the head of global storage architecture for a large financial firm. As Led said earlier, I can't disclose that, but as I look through the list, I know a lot of people that are on there know who I am, but I'm pretty easily to be found. So what I'm responsible for is just basically driving service-oriented architecture from a global perspective. And really what we do is we make sure that what we're doing from a storage also ties into everything else that the firm wants to do globally. So whether it's platform, networking, you name it, we make sure that we all work together and we're designing the solutions that fit into what our strategy is. And you'll see as we go through the slides how this all kind of works itself together. So me, I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. Prior to this, I've been on the client side as well as on the vendor side. And a lot of my focus for about the last 15 to 16 years has been all performance. So everywhere from testing boxes to understanding what clients' needs are to test, stressing out new infrastructures, really understanding the IOs, the profiling, all that great stuff that we have to do and understand. So my background is very extensive in that standpoint. And again, I've done everything you could think of in the storage industry as well as a lot in the data center space. So what do we do? What do we do? What do you do? So new products, Henry mentioned a lot of great things that are coming down the line, flash arrays, object storage. A lot of converged, hyper-converged, you hear a lot of that. You hear cloud, private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud. Now with even from the platform or OS side of the house, you're seeing NFS v4, you're seeing SMB3. There's all these great things that are coming out there, but you have to figure out, how am I actually going to test these? What are we going to do? Do we just listen to what the supplier says and say we agree with it and we roll it out into some kind of QA or some production environment, put some light workloads on it to see if it actually works, and then just cross our fingers and hope it's going to continue to work? So what you have to do is you have to try to figure out what are the methodologies I'm going to use to attempt to go through this and understand what our technologies are going to look like. So what are our challenges, right? We have to define standards. We have to build service catalog offerings. And that goes anywhere from any of the tiers of SAN, NAS, backup, archive platforms, anything along those lines. And where we want to focus is what are the highs and lows, right? So deploying new technologies. What are the limits? What are the failover points? Does this particular SAN array basically degrade by 40% performance at 70% capacity utilization? You have to understand those numbers in order to understand how far you could take your architecture, right? What's the scalability? Can I go so that if a SAN infrastructure says that I could go to 2 petabytes within this frame, can I truly go to that limit, capacity limit, with the performance metrics that I'm using, with the type of I/O classes that I'm using? Is that possible, right? So deploying a new technology, you need to understand the limits, the failover points, and then the scalability of it. And then this is always a good one, right? So we have a new microcode that comes out on a particular frame. We throw it in the lab. We do some functionality testing. Great. It looks good. We roll it out. Next thing you know, 2 days later, we're having performance problems, right? So that's another thing that kind of gets lost in the cases. We have a new microcode. The supplier says there's no performance enhancements in there, but that doesn't mean that there's no performance detriments that were built into that code accidentally, right? So we have to ensure that we have an ability to test out end-to-end not only the functionality, but the performance capabilities of any new microcode before we roll it to production, right? Because that's the worst thing you do is you roll a new code out Saturday morning, Sunday night, Asia Pac's coming online, and now you have a performance problem, right? You don't want to deal with that. So those are kind of the challenges that we work through. Excuse me. So along with that, now we go into the validation, the best practices, right? The accurate method to doing the stress performance. What are some of the difficulties, right? What are some of the difficulties we're facing now? So we go through these big curves within the industry where we go from a distributed format back to a consolidated format. Now we're leaning towards a more distributed format again. We're going into these hyper-converged models. We're going into storage virtualization. Now with the all-flash arrays, you have dedupe and compression. Now the big suppliers are coming out with their all-flash arrays are going to have some kind of compression and dedupe. New microcode releases, which we touched on just prior. But what are some of the theories behind that? What are some of the performance implications of that? Test and utilization, synthetic workloads. So one of the problems we have is as we go through the deck in a couple of slides later, we're going to go through some kind of the test tools that are out there. And the issue we run into is the canned aspect of them, right? You'll have one test tool for one particular use case, another test tool for another particular use case. And then what do we need to do in order to test out a 2 petabyte array? We're going to need a whole server farm just of testing equipment in order to build this up. So it becomes very difficult. And then how do you correlate all that data, right? So you need the CPU platform data. You need the network switch data, the SAN switch data. You need the storage array data. If you're using NAS-based, right, then you need the NAS data. So how do you take all these different data points from all these different infrastructures and try to correlate that into something that's, one, readable, and then two, how do you turn that into some kind of executive presentation that you can then send up the ladder? Those are all the complications that we try to go through in order to go through a validation, in order to build out a best practice use case. So as we go into that, right, we continue, what are our goals as this validation process, right? So you hear of some of the difficulties that we go through, and we all have these challenges. That's part of our industry. That's why we're here. But what we need to do is we have to try to simplify. We need to have the ability to simplify, create a repeatable process, and make it easy enough that as you move on to a different career path, somebody else can come behind you and use it easily enough, right? So we develop and implement an easy, repeatable, scalable, vendor neutral, right? That's important. Vendor agnostic capabilities are the biggest key into doing it. So you talk to any of the big suppliers out there, they'll have their own test tools that you can use or they can use in their labs. And you always have that hidden thought in your head, well, their test tools are probably optimized for them, for their specific use cases, for their specific goals, right? Even when you go out to the spec sites. Those are great, but even though they wrote the document on exactly what they did, do you really believe that 100%? You would like to think so, but you're not really sure. Do you really want to put your paycheck on a table saying, yep, I believe 100% what's out there, so go ahead, roll it into production, and let's see what happens. Upon that, expand our existing workflows, right? Incorporate performance testing as part of a new deployment. So if there's a way that we can create, just as we do validation testing or functionality testing, if there's a way we could just simply flip a trigger, let something run for a day or two, and provide all the performance metrics as we need out of that particular unit, that ensures, that gives us that comfort level, that roll into production is ready to go. No questions asked. We're confident. The limits that we set for that box were 100% accurate. We're good to go, right? We reduce the risk to our production environments, which if you look at that last bullet point on this particular slide, that is by far the most important factor that you ever need to worry about. How do I reduce the risk of rolling something new into production, right, without having to be worried about getting called every night, without having to take down or have a financial or reputational impact to my company? This single bullet point, if you can understand that, that'll take you through the rest of this presentation and have you understand the importance of what we're trying to get through today. So what do? What is the validation process, right? We have to either rely on the suppliers to provide us kind of a general configuration or I/O profile for what we do, right? So kind of the median of what the I/O profile looks like. If we know we're using a specific array for a specific workload, then we're working with the applications to understand what those workload profiles look like, the I/O profiles look like. And then from there, we're creating profiles and creating test criteria, right? What that allows us to do is essentially model production workloads to almost the exact metric that we need, right? And we can always build variances in there, 5 or 10%, month ends, quarter ends. Maybe on the weekends, your particular company does more processing than you do on a Monday morning. Maybe you could also build it to where you have regional turn-ups. So maybe in Asia-Pac, you turn up at a certain time. EMEA, you turn up at another time. Then you have an East Coast U.S. turn-up time. You have a West Coast U.S. turn-up time. So all those different components of what stresses out a storage unit, whether it's IP, fiber channel, or what have you, right? It allows you to understand the different components and build that metrics around there, right? And then at that point, you just kind of deploy, you run your tests, and you analyze the results, right? So in this 4-step process, you've now taken something that from a performance engineering side, which I've been dealing with for, like I said, 15 or 16 years, you've taken like 10 or 15 days of headaches of correlation of data into a simple click of a button and the ability to view and produce reports ad hoc. So as we started getting into earlier, right, different methodologies. So iometer, VD bench, industry benchmarks, all these things that we've been talking about, some of the points that Henry touched on, these are all great tools, and we've all used them in the past, and they still have their purpose in life for today for a specific use case. But how do you outline an agnostic view, something that is completely customizable, something that you can do and build to meet your specific company needs? So one of the things with a lot of these benchmark tools, which is similar to what we have when we look at the supplier data that's given to us, is it's built around what they think as an industry standard. So maybe your company does fit an industry standard profile, but more often or not, it probably doesn't. I know when I look at the firm I work at today versus the firm I worked at 5 years ago versus the firm I worked at 15 years ago, IO profiles, maybe based on database profiles, are pretty close. But when you look at the median of what we're doing at all those different companies, they're different. Even if they're off by a factor of 5 or 10, that factor of 5 or 10 could be detrimental to your company today, right? So you don't want to go based on what the industry's saying. You want to go based on what your company's telling you, what your raw data is telling you, right? So again, these tools have little customizable bits here or there that are pretty cool, but they don't give you the full end. They don't give you the full spectrum of what's customizable, right? Every little nook and cranny, every little dial you can turn, every little lever you can pull. So the last line here, they all lack scalability to the enterprise environment. That's true, right? Again, they're specific. They're for a specific use case. They don't give you that agnostic view across multiple different tiers within your data center. So here's from our perspective. How do we learn about Load Dynamix? So there was multiple iterations. So Load Dynamix has a great marketing campaign. They've been at a lot of trade shows. They have a good sales account team. From our perspective, we were trying to find something that we could basically encompass everything I've been talking about for the last 5 or 10 minutes. Is how can we take all these different difficult components and create into something simple? And we looked at, obviously in-house scripting and all this other great stuff, which is fantastic. But then if something changes, now we have to rewrite our scripts. So Load Dynamix kind of came across the table. We started looking at it. We did a lot of sessions with them. We brought them in for a POC. We spent about 6 months kind of kicking the tires, really vetting through it, really understanding, was this worthwhile or not? And as we did that, we did some various workloads. So up here you see we did some database, we did some iSCSI versus Fiber Channel, kind of some drag runs on what the performance would look like. We did some testing via IP, and that was based on NFS v4, SMB3. We also did it for object testing. But when this all comes together, this is all great, and this seems like kind of fancy stuff. It comes down to how do we build a business case that actually makes sense, right? So that's always a good question, because I know that was the first thing that my manager came to me with was, wow, this looks great, but why should I buy it? Can't you just do this yourself? So when you look at the presentation you've seen today from Henry and what I've gone through throughout the day, it comes down to that risk profile. So where am I? What is this going to how can I protect the firm from falling over? How can I protect any core applications that the company relies on from being on an infrastructure that maybe not be able to handle it, right? So your business case really comes down to your speed to deploy, your ability to assess any current performance problems within the firm, and ensure any infrastructure you roll out is ready to go at the metrics as you provide. So if I tell you that this frame can go to this capacity, my capacity team knows all right, I can push that frame to that limit, and there's no problems, right? I don't have to guess. I don't have to worry about it. My performance engineers don't have to go through this cycle of trying to figure out, all right, well, how much further can I go? Or, all right, we're getting close. Should we start analyzing what the CPU cycles are looking like, and those sort of things. So you look at the benefits that are listed in front of you. I'm not going to read through them, but that is essentially your business case, right? Your business case is, how do I take and spend a couple dollars in order to save millions, right? And we never think about, well, yeah, the supplier tells me it's a 6 nines, it's never going to go down, but they don't actually, they give you 6 nines as far as the box being shut off and data available, but they don't factor in anything that says, well, at this particular workload, you're going to start to degrade in performance, right? And that degrade in performance now doesn't allow you to keep up with the market, which now your firm has just lost some money, and or you may not, or if you're in a production type environment, maybe your production isn't as fast, right? So instead of rolling out 1,000 products a minute, you're only rolling out 300 products a minute, right? So infrastructure is critical. Performance of that infrastructure is more critical, and the risk around it is your business case. So again, thank you for all your time today. I really enjoyed speaking to you guys. I'll be around, so at this point, I will turn it over to Len to proceed. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Phil, and thanks, Henry, for that very informative information here. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about Load Dynamix products, specifically around a storage performance analytics solutions. And I'll touch on kind of what we're trying to do as a company, and at the end of the day, what we see is the core storage challenges, which essentially have been validated by Henry, which most customers are driving for, is lowering that cost of storage infrastructure, whether it's dollars per gig or dollars per IOPS, helping people align performance requirements to their deployment decisions, and being able to efficiently evaluate all these new storage technologies that are coming to market right now. And at the same time, being able to assure performance, both to meet your performance and availability SLAs, to really, as Phil was describing, make performance predictable. I mean, at the end of the day, we all hate surprises and want to avoid that. But at the same time, problems do arise. I mean, no solution is 100% guaranteed to never have any problems. But when those problems do arise, you want to be, frankly, warned about them in advance if you can, or immediately have the information to be able to isolate and remediate those problems. So what we're trying to do here at Load Dynamix is basically accelerate and de-risk your infrastructure transformations. So a little bit about the why organizations are using Load Dynamix, and you heard this primarily from Phil, but a lot of it is around evaluating new technologies, whether it's flash, do my workloads require flash or an all flash? Is NFS v4 worth upgrading from NFS v3? Is OpenStack viable for my workloads or other technologies? And then you're doing head-to-head benchmarks or bake-offs, and obviously Load Dynamix is heavily involved with that, particularly around object storage systems or flash storage systems and which product is better. Then it's around optimizing configurations, optimizing your tiering strategies, or your mix of hard drives versus solid-state drives, being able to resolve problems quickly. So one of the things that now the extended virtual instruments is allowing you to do is monitor for performance issues, and combined with the Load Dynamix problems, now you can literally capture those workload profiles that were causing the problems in your production environment and replay those in a lab to be able to, again, remediate and try fixes in a lab before you implement them in production. And then the final kind of use case around Load Dynamix is that change validation, again, as Phil explained. So it's making sure as your vendors, your storage or switch or server vendors introduce new technologies or firmware updates, application updates or operating system updates, that they don't introduce performance problems into your production environment. So you want to test that in advance with your real-world applications. So many of you are familiar with Load Dynamix in our history. We were originally founded as selling storage performance testing systems to the vendors, And today, all of the major storage vendors, every one of them uses Load Dynamics in their QA and performance engineering teams, as well as most of the privately held storage companies also use us. So we have become kind of the standard among the vendors to do their performance and scalability testing. And then what happened, primarily late 2012, 2013, they started bringing us into their IT end user accounts and to help them understand, how to size and scope their, storage proposals to the vendors. And the vendors wanted to make sure that what they were getting from the vendors was going to meet their needs, and they were going to have predictable performance and all the use cases that we talked about. But now, here we are in 2016, and the IT business at Load Dynamics has now exceeded our storage vendor business. So that's become the majority of our business now. So a little bit about the solution itself. This is kind of the one slide that kind of talks about the whole solution. There's the core software application, which we call Load Dynamics Enterprise. This is what the user interacts with. It's kind of this tool that allows you to access the workload data itself, to analyze that data, to create the tests, to do the what-if analysis, and to see the performance analytics on each of those test cases, which is typically looking at IOPS, throughput, and latency. What we have some various technologies. So there's something on the bottom middle of your screen is around Workload Data Importer. So this is a technology that will allow you to extract data from storage arrays, historical workload data, and then we have our workload sensor that allows you to get the real-time data off of the storage switches, and all that is fed into the workload analyzer that allows you to pre-populate and create, automatically create models that can be used by our workload generation appliance to apply and test any storage array, either head-to-head analysis or, limits testing, performance limits. So that's essentially the solution in one slide. I'll go a little bit more detail now into some of those products. So what we're trying to do at Load Dynamics, and we talk a lot about the term workload or the workload prism. And what we're trying to do is give IT organizations a view into what is causing changes in workload behavior, which, at the highest level, it could be anything from, business level changes, new users, growing users, could be mergers, acquisitions. If you're a service provider, it's certainly adding new customers. Application changes or database updates and new features that you're adding to your software suite. And then obviously infrastructure changes, either firmware changes, server upgrades, HBA settings, all of those things. Every time you change that, that's going to cause a change in your I/O characteristics. And these are things, whether it's your read-write ratios or random sequential and data metadata, block size distributions, file size distributions, your spatial content and the hotspots and dedupe and compression, how that is handled. So temporality, all of those things impact performance. And so what we're trying to do with Load Dynamics is give you that, we call that workload prism, that allows you to understand what of the I/O changes are causing performance changes. So that's really we call the prism, the workload prism there. So a little bit more detail onto the products here. So as I said, we have this workload sensor. This is a brand new product that we just introduced in December. It allows you to do real-time acquisition of workloads, and it does statistical analysis. So it basically is gathering what I call metadata or statistics around your workloads, and it's capturing it off of either a tap or a span port on your network switches. And that data is again being fed up into our workload analyzer. And then we have our workload data importer, as I said, and this is a software tool that's included in all of the base software, the Load Dynamics Enterprise software, that allows you to import any CSV or text file from any array management tool. So if you're, for example, if you're on EMC on Unisphere, you can pull that data in. If you're on NetApp and using OnCommand or PerfStats, you can import that. If you're on HDS using Tuning Manager, you can import that right in there. So, and we can take that data, we can parse that data, into meaningful workload data, again, over the time period that is relevant for your business. Whether you want to analyze a day's worth of traffic or a week, a month, a quarter, or longer, you can make those choices on how you want to analyze your workloads over time. So that's what we extract that historical data, and then we import that, as I said, into our workload analyzer. And this is basically a feature within Load Dynamics Enterprise that allows you to visually see what's going on within your workloads and how they're exercising your storage systems. So there are everything from, we can visualize read-write ratios and command mix and throughput and IOPS over time, your block sizes and how they're varying over time, obviously your data and metadata mix and random sequential. So it's everything around that workload profile, again, for the period of time that you think is relevant to your business. And you can analyze that, and now you can create a workload. It'll automatically pre-populate within Load Dynamics Enterprise based on this workload data. And this is typically very eye-opening when customers see this the first time on their existing production environments, like they've never really seen this data before. And now that they can use this, they can essentially capture that and put it into a model. Now they can start doing testing on various systems. So I'll just give one customer example here, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. But this is an example here, if you can read the slide, from a flash storage evaluation that a large financial services firm did, actually not the one that Phil works for, but a different one, that was evaluating 6 different all-flash array vendors running their Oracle-based workloads that they basically modeled using Load Dynamics. And the interesting point here, and it's maybe tough to read the scales there, but it's on the bottom, it's a little over 1 millisecond average latency over this 4-hour test to nearly, or actually over 6 millisecond latency for the exact same workload on actually 5 all-flash systems, and one was a hybrid system, which you can obviously probably tell. But what you're seeing here is that people think of all-flash systems, I'm going to move my workloads to flash and performance is going to go up, and and typically that's going to be true, but the question is how much flash to deploy. And this was a multi-million-dollar decision for this specific storage purchase that they basically credited Load Dynamics with saving them millions of dollars by not overspending on their flash storage systems and aligning their performance requirements literally to the purchasing decision. So this is the kind of insight, and what causes these differences in performance among flash vendors could be everything from their software algorithms, their controller architectures, to the way they do deduplication, to the way they do compression. Every flash vendor does it differently, in addition to even the types of flash they're using, whether it's SLC or MLC or TLC now. So every flash vendor has implemented things very differently. So, and you need to be able to test and evaluate that, because the differences are not 10%, 20%. They're 100% to 400% differences, and you need to be able to understand that. Okay, so with that, just to kind of close off on Load Dynamics, so the real benefits here are really around 5 core things. So it's being able to optimize your infrastructure, optimizing the cost, eliminating under-provisioning and over-provisioning, being able to mitigate that risk, and Phil obviously talked a lot about that. So identifying those issues before you go to production, accelerating your troubleshooting and finding those problems very quickly and resolving those problems quickly, innovating faster. So be able to evaluate all these new vendors and new technologies and new approaches, again, to drive that cost down and performance up. And then finally, it's just being more efficient. I mean, most people who started off using, with Load Dynamics were using some of these shareware tools and being frustrated and spending a lot of money and doing a lot of custom scripting. And obviously with Load Dynamics, we eliminate that completely. So with that, now I'm going to turn it over to a Q&A and open it up. I see a couple questions here. So what I'll do is I'm going to kind of go through these questions. So feel free to submit your questions exactly using that Q&A tool there, which is kind of like a chat tool. and submit questions. But I see a couple of them already. So this first one here is for Henry. So there's a question here around software-defined storage products, and are you really seeing that being deployed on tier 1 applications? Is it still really mostly for backup kind of applications and archiving, or is it really being used for tier 1 applications yet? So Henry, you want to comment on that?
Sure, I'll take that, Len. At this point, SDS, the market opportunity for SDS is really in the mid-range, and it's also for new emerging technologies like object storage, where you're trying to do a better job of longer-term retention and reducing management costs. The reason why I don't think it's going to really attack the Tier 1 segment for a while is if you look at Tier 1 workloads, some of those workloads there are things that are mainframe connect. SDS isn't going after that, so you're always going to be using Tier 1 for that type of workload. You also see Tier 1 being used for ultra-high availability type operations, and while SDS is starting to move up towards that area, it's not their sweet spot. And also, I think the other aspect, more than the technology and feature gap, the bigger thing to me is just the comfort level. If you're talking about Tier 1 and that level of application, that level of resiliency requirements, it's just going to take longer for people to get rid of that or transition. So that's why I think, while SDS can go up there, maybe in a few years or so, right now the opportunity is more mid-range and below.
Okay, good. Someone here, another question was commenting, actually, they said they actually are beginning to use some of that for Tier 1 systems. Okay, here's another question here. Let's see. So really the question is actually really for Load Dynamics here, which is, if I wanted to integrate with Workload Analyzer, is this something I could get help from with Load Dynamics? And the answer is yes. So we essentially have a professional services team that's available to help you use these tools and actually do the workload analysis. I mean, obviously we're trying to automate as much of that as possible, but we do have a services team that can help you understand the workload analysis and do that for you. So this question is here for it looks like for Phil here. So basically the person was commenting that the Load Dynamics stuff is not inexpensive. So is it really? I mean, you kind of talked a little bit about this already, but as far as how to financially justify things, can you comment a little bit more as how difficult was it to get approval above you?
Sure, absolutely, thanks. So going back to what I was talking about earlier, to build a business case, right, you have to kind of weigh out the risk reward. So what you have to do is you have to analyze what you're currently doing today, what risk factors are you still putting into the environment. For instance, when you put a new piece of equipment on the floor, how thoroughly have you tested it? How 100% sure are you that there's no problems with it? So if you're talking a Tier 3 or Tier 4, if something fails, you're really not worried about it, right? Because you're already on a 3 or 4 nines box, so it is what it is. But if you're talking like a Tier 0 or Tier 1, and you're rolling something out that's only been in the market maybe for 6 months or 12 months, you want to be 100% sure that you're not going to have any performance implications. You're going to make sure that that box truly does what the supplier has said. So when you look at the risk and how much financially a company could lose in that factor, right? So, the business case built is more along the lines of what risk are you eliminating from the environment by leveraging it, and that's how we were able to win it over was being able to display how much risk we were avoiding versus how much risk is still in our environment.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Another question here is someone is asking questions around the built-in file and object test routines. And obviously I'll answer this one. So there are, with every Load Dynamics enterprise, you'll see what's called a workload library is in there. So there are basically set tests that are sample tests that some that frankly we have created ourselves as Load Dynamics. A number of them are customer contributed tests. So you'll see those in there as well. Obviously, the third option there is, again, we have a team here that'll go in there and kind of understand really what you want to test, and our professional services team will go in there and work with you to kind of create something custom for your needs. So you'll see that as well. So those are kind of three solutions, for that in general.
Hey Len, can I just add a touch to that, if I could?
Sure.
Yeah. So the CAN reports or the CAN workloads that come with Load Dynamics are great, but we like to use them also as a template to make minor tweaks and adjustments for our particular environment. So we found the CAN reports, especially in the file object and even in the iSCSI and Fiber Channel world, very useful. And then again, we just make some minor tweaks to it to whatever we need specifically for our use case. So thank you.
That's good. Okay, so this is another question here. I think it's really more for Henry. So do you see there's kind of two competing kind of thoughts, I think is the gist of this question, which is, the need for consolidating vendors, and kind of the industry kind of goes in cycles where, a big consolidation of storage vendors, or, someone could argue that there's a bunch of new storage technologies now, so now it's, I'm bringing in more vendors now. So what's your thoughts, Henry? What do you see customers doing? Is it more a consolidation play, or is it more people are really evaluating new vendors more and more these days?
I definitely see more openness to evaluating vendors. I think it's interesting. You have done a lot of inquiries with big companies, and you talk to some of the big companies, and they'll only, some of them will only buy EMC, some will only buy IBM, and that's when you talk to the storage guy. But from those same companies, I'm also getting inquiries from the Oracle guys and the VMware guys, and they're investigating other opportunities. So I think even though a lot of the storage mentality, a lot of the people that have been storaging well would want to stick with a single vendor, that seems to be their bias. There's definitely, because of the need for innovation and because of the rising influence of the stakeholders, it's going to be more multi-vendor going forward.
Okay, thanks, Henry. One other question here, which looks like the final question, but if anybody is on the line still wants to submit questions, feel free to do that. But this question is actually more for Load Dynamics, which is a question around, do you offer this as a service or is it just a product offering? And the answer is we actually kind of do it both. You can actually use Load Dynamics as a short term for projects if you have some kind of critical decisions you're trying to make, and will come in as a services offering. We've actually done some rental offerings as well. And typically for people who do that, we offer a credit back on the purchase of the products if you eventually purchase it, which frankly most people end up doing. So you actually have different offerings and types of offerings, so it's you don't necessarily have to buy everything all at once. Okay, it looks like that's about it. So I'll just remind everybody that the slides are available, or will be available in the next day or two, and so you'll see, everybody will get an email on that, so you'll be able to download that. You'll actually be able to see the full presentation again if you want to watch it at a later date, or forward on to your colleagues. You'll be able to do that as well. And someone else asked one last question about are we going to be known as Load Dynamics going forward? And the reality is we'll end up keeping the Load Dynamics name as kind of a product line name. So as far as our workload analysis and workload generation products, you'll still see the Load Dynamics name, but everything from the company name, and you'll see us at trade shows and our website, everything will eventually be Virtual Instruments, and we'll say that for pretty much everything here. Where at EMC World, we kind of call it our coming out party, so that'll be the next big event, and that will all be around Virtual Instruments, and you'll see the Load Dynamics products within the Virtual Instruments booth there at that point. Okay, let's see. There's one last question here. Let's see. Actually, two more questions popped up. Let's see. Okay, so this someone is asking a question which is very interesting because it's something we're going to be talking about shortly, which is, in order to make tests vendor agnostic, it would be useful to have a marketplace for test samples. And so actually, you'll see. So actually, around EMC World, and this is kind of I'll do a mini pre-announcement here, but you're going to see something called Workload Central that we'll be announcing, at EMC World, which will be literally, call it a workload library in the cloud. So you're going to see us create this community of users that they can share their workloads, that they can share their tests, and doing that in a community-based environment. And there'll be two benefits of that. One will be for all the users to share among their peers. And again, we can do this as an anonymous way, so it's not like company names are on there unless you want to put it on there, but it can be done anonymously. The second benefit of this is your vendors can have access to these workloads. So let's say you're doing some tests in-house and you see a problem. Now you can share that with your vendor of choice because all your vendors will have access to the same workloads and tests. So in any case, so we'll be introducing that shortly, so you'll be able to see that. Okay, so let's see, one last question. Okay, it's pretty much the same question there. Okay, so I think we'll be on our time here. And just as a point for vendors, the vendors will be able to share their workloads as well. So in any case, so I think we're a minute beyond the time, so I promised we'd stay on schedule here. So I want to again thank Henry and Phil for your time and commitment to this, and thank all of you for spending roughly an hour with us. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them additionally at info@loaddynamix.com, and we'll be able to address those immediately after this as well. So, and of course, visit www.loaddynamix.com or, of course, www.virtualinstruments.com to learn about the new Virtual Instruments products as well. So thank you, everyone, and we'll be signing off now. Take care.